Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? It's me again, Brian, aka Gamer55551. And for this video, I'm going to be taking a look back at my top 10 Nintendo Switch games of 2020. Now, 2020 was sort of a rough year, not just for pretty much everyone, though. A lot of it was because of COVID-19, and because of that, that led to basically a lot of games getting delayed, some kind of getting canceled and all that stuff. But despite that, we did have saw a lot of games sort of get released in 2020, some with high praises, others not, and all that stuff. And while 2020 for the Nintendo Switch may not have been exactly on the same level as, say, 2019, courtesy of games like The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which many people were surprised to see that game make its way over to the Nintendo Switch, it still was a good year for Nintendo, nevertheless, though, with with several games being released for the Nintendo Switch that certainly I thought were really good this year, though. But before we get started with our top 10 or top 10, though, I'm going to start off with our first part, which is the honorable mentions. These are games that I think, while aren't in my top 10, though, and I know no matter what, some may or may not agree with what I said, some may disagree, though, these are still worth mentioning for 2020, and they're worth taking a look at, even if you're not a huge fan of it, though. The first one is Devolver Digital's Carrion, Carrion, though. If there's one thing about Devolver Digital, is that they are known to produce several very interesting smaller titles, though, but also big titles, whether it's like Shadow Warriors or something like Carrion and all that stuff. And this game was very interesting. It was kind of like a part reverse horror and part Metroidvania style of a game. But it was still an enjoyable experience for what Devolver Digital was doing, and I gotta give credit to them. They are known to produce, or shall we say publish, very unique games indeed. So Carrion is an honorable mention. The next one I do want to talk about is Fairy Tail. That's an honorable mention as well. Licensed video games, obviously, particularly anime ones, can be a hit and miss depending on how they are done and all that stuff. And Fairy Tail, I thought, was a good anime licensed video game. I mean, it may not be on the same level as, say, like what Naruto would be or anything like that, but it is a fun RPG style of a game, though. I mean, diehard Fairy Tail fans will probably enjoy it. Others, maybe not so much, though. I will say one negative is that the frame rate can be an issue for some, but since this is not a fast-paced game, it doesn't really bother me as much as it might for others, though. But still, if you're looking for a good, like anime title or anything like that, consider taking a look at Fairy Tail. It may not be on the level, let's say, the Sword Art line art, but still enjoyable nevertheless. The next one I do want to talk about is Samurai Jack Battle Through Time, though. Now, to me, Samurai Jack is one of my favorite cartoons of all time, though, with the 5th season that sort of concluded the series once and for all. But to see them come back and do a video game is sort of interesting indeed, though. I will say the gameplay is definitely fun. You definitely get somewhat of a Ninja Gaiden vibe out of it, considering some of the folks who worked on the Ninja Gaiden series worked on this game, though. It's still a licensed game. It's nowhere going to be as, it's not going to be great, but as far as a licensed game goes, it's still good, nevertheless, though. So Samurai Jack Battle Through Time makes it onto my honorable mention. The next one I want to add to it is SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. Now, I'll admit, I'm not a big SpongeBob SquarePants fan. I never really got into the series as much. I've watched a couple of episodes here and there are some of it can be a bit funny. There's even the infamous, the famous Sweet Victory and all that stuff. And playing SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom, though, I will say that basically I will say it's sort of a combination between some of the 3D Mario games, like Mario 64, to some of the Banjo-Kazooie games that I remember, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Granted, it's not going to give Mario a run for its money, but I will say, like with Samurai Jack Battle Through Time, though, as far as a licensed game goes, I will say this one is also pretty good, nevertheless, though. The next one I want to talk about is the Outer Worlds for the Nintendo Switch. Now, this one might be a bit controversial because of the Switch version, though. There are those who complain about how the game just looked terrible, how this is an example of why not every game should be ported over to the Nintendo Switch, which I would like to say I strongly disagree with that argument, because I believe that, after looking at games like Doom Eternal, it shows the Switch is capable. It's a matter of optimization and compression, and whether or not how much effort you're willing to put on it, though. And while the visuals are certainly a mixed bag and all that, the gameplay is enjoyable nevertheless. It does have that Fallout vibe to the game, which certainly isn't a bad thing in any way, and it is still an enjoyable game provided you could get past the visuals and all. Now, there were issues of people claiming the game crashed on them and not. I didn't see anything like that happen during my playthrough of the game. I can't speak for everyone, though, but as far as I'm aware of, the Outer Worlds just ran fine on the Nintendo Switch. As far as whether you should pick up this version over the others, I would say if you're looking for the best looking version of the game, go with it either on PS4, Xbox One, or PC. If you're okay with the visuals on the Switch visuals and like the portability, though, then consider picking it up on the Nintendo Switch. Either way, regardless of what your main system of choice is, the Outer Worlds, in my opinion, is still a good game. It's worth playing nevertheless. The next one I do want to talk about is Rune Factory 4 special for the Nintendo Switch. Basically, this is an enhanced version of the 3DS version and all that stuff. And it is a fun game, though. It's a bit more relaxing. It's a mixture of an action RPG and farming simulation. It's a little bit different than, the Harvest Moon series. Nevertheless, though, it's still an enjoyable game and all. It's also something to keep you occupied as we wait for Rune Factory 5 and everything like that. Though, like I said, visually it's an upgraded version of the 3DS, so it's not going to look as good as, say, like other Switch games, though, but it is still enjoyable, and if you missed out on the first time, it's worth giving this one a shot. Plus, it's something to keep you occupied as we wait for Rune Factory 5. The next one I want to talk about is basically Zombie Army Trilogy, though. Now, this one is definitely a fun game indeed. It's basically a Quentin Tarantino World War II vibe, where you're basically battling Nazi zombies and all that's been resurrected courtesy of Adolf Hitler and all that. It's a story is completely over the top, but that's kind of the charm to it. And like I said, you definitely get that Quentin Tarantino and grindhouse vibe to it, which certainly is a very good thing in terms of setting the mood and the style, though. Plus, you're pretty much getting everything in the cartridge, all the chapters and so forth. So it's definitely a fun game if you missed out on it. Plus, it's something where you could either play, at home or on the go, courtesy of the Nintendo Switch. It's going to be really interesting if Zombie Army 4 ever makes its way over to the Nintendo Switch. I would like for that to happen, but it will depend on whether or not it is technically possible. But either way, though, Zombie Army Trilogy is a fun game, whether you're playing it alone or with other people. So it's worth taking a look at in terms of playing on the Nintendo Switch. The next one I want to show off is, this one's sort of controversial, but still worth showing off, and that is the Wonderful 101 Remaster. Full disclosure, I did back this game on Kickstarter and all. The Wonderful 101 was a niche title when it was originally released on the Wii U, though, and it was one of the few titles that utilized the Nintendo Wii U gamepad. Sadly, though, it didn't sell as well as Nintendo or Platinum had hoped for. So it was kind of interesting to see when Platinum announced that they were going to be bringing this game not only to the Nintendo Switch, but other platforms as well. Of course, that also came with some controversy in terms of how the Kickstarter was run, to the fact that there were some shipment issues and all that stuff. And in the end, though, the game is still enjoyable, but it still had a bit of that learning curve to it, especially since the original Wii U one had ability, you had to draw on the Wii U gamepad using the analog sticks and all. It took a little bit of a learning curve and all that stuff. It's possible, and some people may know what they're doing, but this one was definitely, it was certainly tough and all. But nevertheless, It's still a fun game, especially if you missed out on the first one, though. So, the Wonderful 101 Remastered definitely goes into my honorable mention. And last but certainly not least, though, and that would be Streets of Rage 4. The fact that they brought this series back or brought in the new entry is pretty amazing. It pretty much did what Final Fight or even Contra couldn't even do. You know, Final Fight Streetwise and Contra Rogue Corp and all that stuff. It actually delivered a game with beautiful art style, solid music, including some tracks from the original musician who worked on the first and second Streets of Rage and all that stuff. Third one, music hit and miss and all that stuff, but the music in the game was really good, and the gameplay and the combat is as enjoyable as it plays like classic Streets of Rage, which to some that might be a good thing. To others, that might be a bad thing, though. But nevertheless, Streets of Rage 4 is an awesome game to play. I enjoyed playing on the Nintendo Switch, but it's pretty much available on other systems as well. But it all really comes down to whether picking up the Switch version or not is based on your view on portability. But either way, if you're a fan of old school brawlers like Double Dragon or Final Fight or even the old Streets of Rage game, then Streets of Rage 4 is worth picking up. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll get to part 2, and this one is through 10 through 6 of our top 10 Nintendo Switch games of 2020. I also forgot to mention that for the games I mentioned, I do have my reviews on them. I'll have a link in the description of this video. So we'll take a quick break, and we will be right back. Alright, okay, we are back with part 2 of our top 10, or at least my top 10 Nintendo Switch games of 2020. So now that we're done with part 1, which is the honorable mention, we'll start with part 2, and this is basically 10 through 6. So we'll start off with the first one, which is at number 10, and that is the Borderlands Legendary Collection, though. Now, there have been a lot of people who would have loved to see the Borderlands series come to the Nintendo Switch and all that stuff, but there were not many people were sure if it was going to happen, ranging from some comments that Randy Pitchford, yes, the same Randy Pitchford who's known to create controversies and all, including the infamous Alien Colonial Marines debacle, though, to ranging from they ended conversations with Nintendo to asking for 1 million tweets for Borderlands 2 to come to the Nintendo Switch. Despite that, though, we saw rumors of the game started to pop up on several ratings boards, and eventually it was announced as part of 2K loving the Nintendo Switch, though. And the fact that they brought all 3 of these games over is definitely nice. It runs well on the Nintendo Switch and all, even at 1080p, even at 30 frames per second, not 60 frames per second some folks would like, but it runs perfectly fine. And I will say the developers, if I could look them up, Turn Me Up did a really good job bringing these games over to the Nintendo Switch. The one big downside with the Switch version, obviously, is the fact that, well, if you look at here, is the download requirement, which basically you only had the first game on the Switch cartridge, but even though you had to download the rest of it, same with Borderlands 2 and 3, which basically would eat through a lot of your storage space on the Nintendo Switch unless you had like a big, really big micro SD card and all. But storage space aside, though, Borderlands Legendary Collection is still a good game, especially with the whole looter shooter concept and RPG mechanics in it, and the cast of character and the world of Pandora and all. So it's still a good game. It's just a matter of finding how much space you have in your storage in your Nintendo Switch and whether or not you're okay with that and all. But if you are, Borderlands is definitely one of the few first-person shooters I would recommend getting for the Nintendo Switch. The next one on my list, number 9, goes to BioShock Collection, though. The BioShock series is another series I enjoy as much, same with the Borderlands, though. It's mostly focused on a narrative-driven story, though, and you basically explore the world of both Columbus and and Rapture, and seeing how everything gone like straight to hell with Andrew Ryan and with Rapture and Comstock, if I'm saying the name correctly, in BioShock Infinite. The world is just like impressive and all that stuff. BioShock 1 is still a classic, even though some of the mechanics might be outdated. Some people might view some of the mechanics a little bit outdated though. BioShock 2 is considered controversial for some folks though, but I still think it's a good game. BioShock Infinite is still my favorite one, including the world of Columbus and all that stuff, even though I'm not a fan of the whole you can only carry 2 weapons and all that. But in either way, it's still a good game though. Like Borderlands Collection, though, you have to download the rest, so that's going to be annoying for some people. But if you're willing to look past that, though, BioShock the Collection is another first-person shooter that I would definitely recommend, along with the Borderlands series, nevertheless. Number 8, and obviously this is the last one as part of 2K. I probably think you've seen this as a panel, though. Number 8 is basically XCOM 2 collection, though. Anybody who has played the Mario plus Rabbids game would remember that some of the people who play the game say that this feels like XCOM in a way, and well, it is. Basically, it's a RPG strategy type of a game where you basically move your players around, find a good spot for cover and all, and try to take out the enemies, though, especially when you have moves like Overwatch or special moves. Although be careful, though, because the enemies can do the same thing. The fact that they brought this game over to the Nintendo Switch is definitely impressive and all, and it plays great. I'm glad that they brought all the DLCs. However, like BioShock and Borderlands, it does require you to download the rest, which is a little bit annoying though, although not as bad as BioShock or basically the Borderlands collection and all that. So it's not as bad, but it's still annoying nevertheless. But still, gameplay is still enjoyable, and if you enjoyed games like Mutant Year Zero, Road to Eden, or Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, though, you'll definitely like XCOM 2. And if 2K ever decides to bring the other XCOM games over, I definitely would be excuse me, I definitely would be down with that indeed. The next one, which is number 7, is basically Immortal Phoenix Rising, though. Now, this game kind of surprised me a little bit, though. I was a little concerned when they made the announcement and when the title was originally called Gods and Monsters, because while it definitely sounded promising, though, a sort of a Breath of the Wild style game made by the folks who did Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I was a little worried since we didn't really see any gameplay footage or anything like that, and we were getting close to the original release date, which was around in February and all that stuff. But I believe, to me, in the end, it turned out the wait was kind of worth it, though, as, to me, Immortal Phoenix Rising turned out to be one of the Ubisoft's better games they put out, though. Combat is very similar to Assassin's Creed and to Breath of the Wild, which can be a good thing for some people or bad thing for other folks out there. And the art style of the game looks really nice, even on the Nintendo Switch, even if it doesn't look anywhere near as good as what you would see on like the PC or Stadia or Amazon Lunar or PS4, PS5, Xbox One or Xbox Series X or S, though. But nevertheless, though, it is still an enjoyable game, especially if you're a fan of the Assassin's Creed or Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Plus, for Switch owners, though, it's something to keep us occupied as we wait for Breath of the Wild 2 or whatever Nintendo is going to call the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I think it's going to be called something different, but that's my take on it. But either way, though, Immortal Phoenix Rising surprised me, and I do think it's definitely one of Ubisoft's better games, and one I would definitely ask for those others out there to check it out. And the last one on part 2, 10 to 6, is number 6, and that is Doom Eternal. I don't know how Panic Button does it, but somehow they managed to do what many view as the impossible on the Nintendo Switch. Much like they did with the first Doom and Wolfenstein 2 The Colossus, though, they managed to get Doom Eternal running on the Nintendo Switch. The game itself is just impressive, and it is still as enjoyable as it when the game originally came out earlier in the year for the PS4 and the Xbox One and the PC. Obviously, no matter how you look at it, though, compromises had to be made to make this game to run properly on the Nintendo Switch. That includes some visual downgrades, especially down to 720p if you're playing in dock mode, and having it run at 30 frames per second. That may not sit with everyone, especially if you're looking for the best looking version. You'll probably have to look someplace else. PC, Stadia, PS4, Xbox One and all. But the fact that it's still it managed to make it, still Panic Button managed to get this game to run well though. And it follows what Doom 2016 is, which is still that fast pace, over the top, gotta keep moving, first person shooter that a lot of people enjoyed when Doom 2016 came out and all, and it still is an enjoyable game. And the fact that they got this game running on the Nintendo Switch is absolutely impressive nevertheless though. It is worth getting. This game as a whole is worth getting, especially if you enjoy Doom 2016. Whether the Switch version is worth getting or not will depend on if you're willing to tolerate it running at 30 frames per second and tolerate the fact that visually it won't look as good as the other versions. But if you're willing to accept that though, then Doom Eternal is worth getting. It's definitely one of the better first-person shooters out there, to be exact. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll get to part 3. And this one is from 5 to 1, which will be my number 1 game for 2020 on the Nintendo Switch. So we'll take a quick break, and we will be right back. Okay, and we are back with part 3 of my video of the top 10 Nintendo Switch games of 2020. So now we're getting to the final part, which is 5 to 1. And we'll start off with number 5, and this one has to do with Hades. And this one, for an indie game, this one was kind of interesting though. It basically, as I mentioned in my video review of the game though, it felt like a mixture of a God of War and Rygar vibe to it, which is certainly which certainly isn't a bad thing. The art style looks nice, and the gameplay follows a similar like roguelike randomized dungeon kind of approach, as basically you try to get through, try to leave Hades and try to go, or Hades and go up to like Mount Olympus and all that stuff. But like just like any like Souls-like approach, I think I forgot to say rogue Souls-like approach, though the game can get a little bit difficult, and every time you die you go back and keep trying and trying. And the story about Hades' son and all is just very interesting. It's a very well crafted game, and I gotta give credit to the developers that made this though. This one was a little bit of a surprise for me for 2020 though, and it's definitely a fun game, especially if you have it on the Nintendo Switch. Voice acting's great, art style looks nice, so Hades definitely makes it into number 5 though. Number 4 on this one is, and some might consider this controversial depending on how you look at it, is Paper Mario, the Origami King. Now, this one, the Paper Mario series has had its ups and downs, where the series had its highs with Paper Mario The Thousand Years Doors. It's had its lows with entries like Paper Mario Sticker Star Saga, Super Paper Mario Color Splash. Some people were okay, didn't mind those games. Others did not receive a lot of love for a lot of the Paper Mario fans. So with the newest entry, the Origami King, that's definitely a good game, even if it definitely wasn't as the traditional Thousand Years Door kind of approach though. Visually, it looks nice with the arts and crafts kind of look to the game and all that stuff. The combat was sort of a bit of a learning curve with the whole rings and setting up the enemies though. Some people didn't mind it, others just downright hated it and just wished that Nintendo went back to like a tried and true formula for the Paper Mario games or the Mario RPGs in general though. But either way, I did think Paper Mario was a very Paper Mario The Origami King was a very good Paper Mario game. I will also admit I did feel like this one was a little bit darker than, say, other Paper Mario games in the past. And that's not necessarily a bad thing or anything like that. So Paper Mario The Origami King is at number 4. Number 3, and unfortunately I can't find the case for it though. Unfortunately, I don't know where it is, so I'll have to look again though. Is Super Mario 3D All Stars though. Just like Super Mario All Stars was when it was released on the Super Nintendo back in like the 90s and all that stuff. Super Mario 3D All Stars is a collection of 3 of Mario's 3D adventures: Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Mario Galaxy. All 3 of the games still hold up very well, even though some people have some mixed views of Mario Sunshine. Some don't mind it, some hate it though. I often consider it the black sheep of the 3D Mario games, to be exact, right next to Super Mario 3D World. But in either case, the gameplay and all that still holds up very well, even though some may wish that they made some adjustments, here and there with the game and all that. But it still is fun to play these classic games, particularly Mario Galaxy and Super Mario 64. They still hold up even after all these years. One complaint I will make for Super Mario 3D All Stars is the fact that I don't know why they didn't add Super Mario Galaxy 2. I mean, to me, it just doesn't make any sense why Nintendo didn't even add that in there. To me, it personally seems kind of stupid why Nintendo didn't do that, though. So, there is some criticism towards Super Mario 3D All-Stars, but nevertheless, they're classic 3D Mario games. They hold up very well. It's worth picking up. I'm a little mixed on the whole limited run that they're doing, which will end on March of this year. But nevertheless, though, it is still a good game, though. And if you're a fan of the old, the early 3D Mario games out there, it's worth taking a look at for Super Mario 3D All-Stars. Number 2 on my list is Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, though. Now, when it comes to Warrior games, as I mentioned before, though, in the past, Warrior games can be kind of a hit and miss, though. But the Nintendo-themed Warriors games, I've always felt like those were the better Warriors games, because it feels like they put more effort into that than the traditional Warrior games, to be exact. And Age of Calamity, though, is definitely one of those games indeed. What's interesting is that it takes basically, like Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, it offers a brand new story. This one tends to focus more on the world of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, as this takes place before the events of the first Breath of the Wild game and all that stuff. And it borrows certain elements from Breath of the Wild indeed, and the fact you get to play all of the Guardians and all that stuff. Visually, it maintains that look that Breath of the Wild was known for, which certainly is nice and all that stuff, and the combat is still as enjoyable, though, even though I think Princess Zelda had a bit of a learning curve given her combat moves and all that stuff, but Link's was pretty much very similar to what he was in Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. But in either way, though, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is definitely a fun collaboration with Koei Tecmo and basically Nintendo. Indeed, though, if they ever do another Nintendo-themed Warrior games, honestly, I think Xenoblade Chronicles should get the Warrior theme, though. I mean, seriously, if Fire Emblem Warriors can succeed on this, if Hyrule Warriors can succeed on this, why can't we do one based off of Xenoblade Chronicles? I think that would be a perfect fit. So, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is number 2. And now we're to the number 1 Nintendo Switch game of 2020, at least from my point of view. Some may or may not agree. And my number 1 Nintendo Switch game for 2020 is Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, though. A port of the original 2011 release on the Wii, which was later ported over to the new Nintendo 3DS, though. Xenoblade Chronicles is still a classic game on the Nintendo systems, and it still remains to this day. The combat is still as enjoyable, as you use basically arts to attack basically your enemies, though, and all that. And the world around it, though, is still fascinated. Nevertheless, though, like I said, combat's good, even though I do think Xenoblade Chronicles 2 does a better job with it, though. And while the visuals are definitely an improvement over Xenoblade Chronicles 2, at least in portable mode, though, it still runs at a low, I think 480p, though, which is a little bit unfortunate, though. However, I will say, when playing it in portable mode, it definitely looks it definitely looks better than what Xenoblade Chronicles 2, not by a whole lot, but still, nevertheless though. The game is still great with a lot of customization. The characters, Shook, Ryan, and currently his famous "It's Ryan time" and all that stuff. It's still a classic, no matter what. I'm glad Monolith remade this game and brought it to the Nintendo Switch, though. It makes me now wish, and I seriously hope Monolith does this, though, it makes me wish that we get a actual remake of Xenoblade Chronicles X. That is a game I would love to see get the remake treatment, though, on the Nintendo Switch. Given how well Xenoblade Chronicles 2 sold, given how well Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition sold, though, Nintendo and Monolith, it's time for basically to see Xenoblade Chronicle X get the remake treatment on the Nintendo Switch, and who knows, maybe we get a Xenoblade Chronicles X2. That would be nice if that does happen. But until then, my number one Nintendo Switch game for 2020 is Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Okay, this concludes my top 10 Nintendo Switch games for 2020. And again, these are my picks. What are yours? Do you agree with my top 10 that I picked for Nintendo Switch games of 2020? Do you agree with the honorable mentions that I mentioned? Do you think there are some places you think you would switch the games around? Are there games you think I should have put on this list? Do you agree with what my top 10 are? Do you disagree? Do you have a difference of opinion? As always, sound off in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. And if you like this video, I hope you hit the like button. I would appreciate it. And I hope you do subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you do, make sure you hit the bell icon for notifications of any new videos I put up. Also, feel free to share this video if you want to, and feel free to donate to my channel if you like. You can do it through PayPal Me or Patreon. Links will be in the description of this video. And I will see you again next time when I do another video. Hopefully that'll be soon. Until then, from Southern California, I wish you all a good day then. Bye!